My brother announced I wasn't invited to the family reunion because I was real family, and my parents just laughed. I left without a word. 4 days later, my dad's attempt to withdraw $3,400 was denied, and I sent him a simple screenshot. Family-only policy. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The laughter was the worst part. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was a wave of full-throated, genuine amusement that crashed over the dinner table, and I was drowning in the middle of it. The sound echoed off the polished cherry wood of my parents' dining room, a room I had helped them furnish, and lodged itself deep in my chest like a shard of glass. I had been feeling tired all week, a bone-deep weariness that came from closing out a particularly brutal fiscal quarter at work. I was a senior financial analyst, a job that demanded precision, long hours, and an emotional detachment I was usually quite good at maintaining. But that evening, sitting at my childhood dinner table, my defenses were down. I just wanted a simple, warm family meal. My mother, Susan, had made her famous pot roast, the aroma of which usually felt like a hug. My father, Richard, was telling a story about his golf buddy, and my brother, Mark, was lounging in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. His wife, Jennifer, sat beside him, nodding along with a placid smile. It was during a lull in the conversation that I made my mistake. I brought up the annual family reunion, a trip to a lakeside cabin we'd taken every summer for 2 decades. I was just looking at the calendar, I said, a genuine smile on my face. Can't wait for the reunion. I think I can finally take a full week off this year. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. My father cleared his throat and studied a spot on the ceiling. My mother began meticulously arranging the peas on her plate. Mark, however, leaned forward, a slow, condescending smirk spreading across his face. "Oh, Martha," he said, drawing out my name as if explaining something to a small child. "About that, there's been a bit of a change of plans." I looked at him, confused. What change? He leaned back, hooking his thumbs into the pockets of his jeans. "Well, we decided to make it a bit more exclusive this year." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes sweeping the table. "You see, we're not inviting you. It's for real family." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. "Real family?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. I looked to my parents for help, for some kind of intervention. Surely they wouldn't let him say that. But then came the laughter. Mark started it, a loud, barking laugh that Jennifer quickly joined. Then, to my utter disbelief, my father chuckled. A deep, rumbling sound that shook his chest. Even my mother, my own mother, let out a little titter behind her napkin, her eyes darting away from mine. They were all laughing. At me. The implication was clear. Mark had a wife and 2 children. He had built what they considered a proper family unit. I, at 45, was single and childless, dedicated to a career that they often described with a mix of pride and pity. I was the successful one, the responsible one, the one who managed their finances and made sure their retirement was not just stable but comfortable. But I was not, it seemed, real family. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. The analyst in me took over, processing the data with cold, stark clarity. The equation was simple. My love and support were variables they had taken for granted, and the result was my public exclusion. My presence was conditional. My worth, in their eyes, was negotiable. Slowly, I placed my napkin on the table beside my uneaten pot roast. I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound against the hardwood floor. The laughter died down, replaced by a sudden, awkward tension. 4 pairs of eyes watched me. "Thank you for dinner, Mom," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "I have an early morning." I walked out of the dining room, down the familiar hallway lined with family photos. Mark's wedding, his children's birthdays, me in my graduation cap looking years younger and impossibly naive. I collected my purse and my coat, slipped on my shoes, and walked out the front door without looking back. As I sat in my car, the quiet hum of the engine a stark contrast to the cacophony of betrayal ringing in my ears, I finally allowed a single thought to surface, clear and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. The pain was immense, a physical ache in my soul. But this insult, this deliberate act of cruelty, was more than just a personal wound. It was a fundamental miscalculation on their part. The betrayal was worse than any insult could ever be. The 20-minute drive home felt like an eternity. Each red light was a moment for the scene to replay in my mind. The smug look on Mark's face, the casual cruelty in his tone, and worst of all, the chorus of laughter from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. By the time I unlocked my front door, the initial shock had begun to curdle into a cold, hard knot of anger in my stomach. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of calm and order, felt vast and empty. I didn't turn on the lights, preferring to sit in the dark on my sofa, the city lights twinkling impersonally through the large window. I had spent my entire adult life being the responsible one. While Mark bounced from one creative venture to another, always needing a small loan from our parents to get his next brilliant idea off the ground, I had been methodically building a career and a stable life. I was the one who sorted out their tangled tax returns, who set up their investment portfolio, who negotiated with contractors when the roof leaked. I did it because I loved them, and because it was what a daughter did. I never saw it as a transaction. Until now. Now, I saw the entire relationship as a ledger, and for the first time, I was looking at the glaring imbalance. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Martha, dear," she began, her voice breezy and cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "I was just calling to see if you got home all right. You left in such a hurry." "I got home fine, Mom," I said, my tone flat. "Oh, good. You know, you shouldn't be so sensitive," she continued, and the knot in my stomach tightened. "Mark was just joking. You know how he is. He has a very unique sense of humor." Joking, humiliating someone to the point of leaving their own family dinner was a joke. It didn't sound like a joke, Mom, and you and Dad laughed. There was a slight pause on her end. "Well, it was just the way he said it. It was funny. You have to admit, you can be a little too serious sometimes, Martha, always so focused on work and numbers." The condescension was breathtaking. She was not only dismissing my feelings, but blaming me for having them. She was telling me my reaction was the problem, not their cruelty. It was a classic pattern, one I had endured for years but never seen with such painful clarity. Mark was the charming, creative one. I was the serious, dependable one. He was the sun around which their world revolved. I was the utility company that kept the lights on, unnoticed until there was a problem. "I have to go, Mom. I have a meeting." It was a lie, but I couldn't continue the conversation. "All right, dear, just try not to hold a grudge. Family is too important for that." She hung up, leaving me seething. Family is too important. The hypocrisy was staggering. They had just told me I wasn't part of it, yet I was expected to uphold the obligations of that very institution. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of anger and hurt. I tried to work, but the numbers on my spreadsheets blurred together. The memory of their laughter was a constant, intrusive soundtrack in my head. But as the day wore on, something else began to crystallize amidst the emotional turmoil. It was a quiet, cold thought that started as a whisper and grew into a roar. They saw me as the family accountant, the provider, the safety net. They had grown so accustomed to the benefits of my role that they had forgotten the person filling it. They saw me as a resource. It was time I started acting like one. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking at work files. I was logged into the online portal for a very specific bank account, an account I had opened years ago titled Richard and Susan Miller Living Expenses. I was the primary account holder. My father was a signatory, allowing him to withdraw funds, but he had no administrative access. I was the only one who could deposit money, set transfer limits, or close it. Into this account, I deposited a generous sum every month, far more than their pensions provided. ensuring they could live without worrying about bills, groceries, or the occasional vacation. It was my gift to them, a silent testament to my love and success. A gift they had just spat back in my face. As I scrolled through years of transactions, a quiet resolve settled over me. They believed family was conditional. Fine, so was my generosity. They had drawn a line in the sand, and I was finally ready to draw one of my own. They had forgotten one crucial thing about their serious, dependable daughter. She never missed a detail, and she always balanced the books in the end. My devotion to my family wasn't something that had happened by accident. It was a role I had assumed early in life. I remembered being a teenager, sitting at the kitchen table with my parents as they fretted over the mortgage. I was the one who suggested they refinance, who researched the best rates, who helped them fill out the paperwork. While Mark was outside playing street hockey, I was inside learning about amortization schedules. It was just how I was wired. When I graduated from college with a degree in finance, my first major act wasn't to buy a new car or take a lavish trip. It was to give my parents the down payment for a small cottage they'd dreamed of owning. I told them it was a loan, but we all knew I would never ask for it back. Mark, who had just dropped out of his third university program to find himself, had sneered at the time. "Always the little banker, Martha. Don't you ever have any fun?" His idea of fun was taking our parents' car on a road trip and returning it with a dented fender and an empty gas tank. They had just sighed, paid for the repairs, and told him to be more careful next time. Over the years, the pattern solidified. My career advanced steadily. I moved from junior analyst to a senior position at a prestigious firm in the city. I was meticulous, forward-thinking, and trustworthy, qualities my clients valued and paid for handsomely. Meanwhile, Mark drifted. He was a freelance graphic designer, a photographer, a web developer, always the latest trendy, creative gig that promised a big break that never quite materialized. He had talent, but he lacked discipline and, more importantly, a work ethic. His charm, however, was his greatest asset. He knew how to play the part of the struggling artist, the misunderstood genius. He could spin tales of difficult clients and artistic integrity that made my parents nod with sympathy. My steady, predictable success seemed boring in comparison. He was the exciting one, the one with stories. I was the one with spreadsheets. The true antagonist in my life wasn't just Mark. It was the narrative he had so expertly woven around us. A narrative my parents had willingly bought into. He was the heart of the family, and I was the wallet. He would show up for Sunday dinners with a cheap bottle of wine and a charming anecdote, and be praised for making the time. I would show up after a 60-hour work week, having just transferred several $1,000s into their expense account, and be asked why I looked so tired. Mark's interest in my finances had become more pointed in recent years. He'd make joking comments about my cushy salary or ask invasive questions about my investment portfolio. I saw it for what it was, a mixture of envy and calculation. He wasn't just jealous of my success. He was assessing it as a resource he might one day tap into. He viewed my money as an extension of our parents' assets, something he was naturally entitled to a piece of. The family reunion was his masterpiece of manipulation. He had framed it as an event for real family, a term deliberately crafted to exclude me. He knew it would hurt me, but the goal wasn't just cruelty, it was strategic. By pushing me out, he was consolidating his position as the center of the family. He was creating a new, smaller circle with him and his family at the core, making my parents even more reliant on him emotionally. It was a power play, and his smug expression at the dinner table told me he thought he had won. He was a polished antagonist, his malice cloaked in the guise of brotherly teasing. He never raised his voice. His insults were delivered with a smile. He was an expert at making me feel like I was the one with the problem, that I was the one who was too sensitive, too serious, too different. He had spent a lifetime convincing our parents that his irresponsibility was charming and my stability was cold. And now they believed him. They had laughed. That single, collective sound was the culmination of 30 years of his careful, insidious work. He had finally made me an outsider in my own home, and he had used my parents as his willing accomplices. He had forgotten, however, that the banker always keeps a record of every transaction. For 3 days after the disastrous dinner, I maintained radio silence. I didn't answer my mother's daily calls, and I ignored a text from my father that simply said, "Your mother is worried." I needed the space, not just to process the emotional fallout, but to think. The hurt was still a raw, open wound, but the analyst in me was taking over. Emotions were data points, and the data was telling me that my current strategy of unconditional support had failed catastrophically. It was time for a new one. The turning point came on the fourth day, a Thursday afternoon. I was in my office, reviewing a quarterly earnings report, when my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. It was an alert I had set up years ago for any attempted withdrawal over $1,000 from the living expenses account. Alert: a withdrawal of $3,400 initiated by Richard Miller has been denied due to insufficient funds. I stare. D at the message. Insufficient funds? That wasn't right. I kept a healthy buffer in that account. I logged into the online portal immediately. The balance was just over $500. Then I saw it. My automatic monthly transfer, the large sum I deposited on the first of every month, was scheduled for the next day, Friday. My father had tried to pull out a large amount of cash the day before my transfer was due. And the amount, $3,400. It was oddly specific. It wasn't for bills or groceries. It was the price of a luxury item. A deposit on a rental property, perhaps. Like, for instance, a large lakeside cabin for a real family reunion. A cold wave of clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about my parents' regular expenses. This was for the reunion. Mark had likely found some grand place, promised my parents he'd handle it, and then told my father to just pull the money from the account. The account that I funded. The audacity was breathtaking. They had kicked me out of the family, but had no problem using my money to pay for the party I wasn't invited to. That was it. The last thread of familial obligations snapped. I was no longer a hurt daughter. I was a financial institution that had just been notified of a fraudulent transaction. My passive grief transformed into active, focused resolve. I took a screenshot of the payment denied notification. My fingers flew across the screen as I drafted a text message to my father. There was no anger in the words, just cold, hard fact. I attached the image and wrote, "Regarding your withdrawal attempt, it appears the payment was denied. Must be that new, family-only policy you were all so enthusiastic about." I hit send. A profound sense of calm settled over me. The trap was not something I had to build. It had been in place for years. The clever trap was simply the truth of their financial situation, a truth I had shielded them from out of love and duty. Now, the shield was down. My phone rang less than a minute later. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let it ring. He called a third time. I silenced my phone and put it in my desk drawer. The investigation didn't require a private eye or a lawyer. My greatest weapon was my professional skill set. I opened a new spreadsheet. For the next 2 hours, I worked with a chilling efficiency I usually reserved for corporate clients. I pulled every statement from the living expenses account for the past 10 years. In one column, I entered the total of my monthly contributions. In a second column, I entered the total deposits from their pensions. In a third column, I detailed every significant withdrawal over $500, cross-referencing them with my memory. $2,000 new tires for Mark's car, $5,000 Mark's business investment, $1,200 emergency dental work for Jennifer. The numbers told a story more damning than any accusation I could ever make. Over the past decade, my contributions had accounted for nearly 70% of the total funds in that account. Their pensions barely covered the property taxes and utilities. Everything else, the nice dinners, the new car every few years, the country club membership, and most glaringly, the endless stream of cash to bail out Mark, had been paid for by me. I printed the spreadsheet. It was 12 pages long. The final page showed the grand totals in a large, bold font. It was a document of irrefutable fact. It was a bill for services rendered. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that a collection attempt was imminent. The only question was when they would show up at my door. The furious phone calls continued for the rest of the afternoon. My father left a string of increasingly agitated voicemails. They started with confusion. "Martha, call me. The bank card isn't working." Moved to frustration. "I don't know what's going on, but you need to fix this now." And finally landed on pure anger. "This is unacceptable. I need that money. Whatever childish game you're playing, it stops now." Interspersed with his messages were texts from my mother, each one dripping with passive aggression. "Your father is very upset, Martha. You're causing a scene. Please just call us and sort this out. We're family." The irony of that last message almost made me laugh out loud. I didn't respond to any of them. I knew a phone conversation would devolve into a chaotic mess of accusations and gaslighting. They had proven they couldn't be trusted to have a respectful conversation. So, I waited. I knew they wouldn't be able to resist a face-to-face confrontation. They would need to see me, to try and impose their will on me in person. My prediction came true 2 days later on Saturday morning. The loud, insistent knock on my apartment door echoed like a drumbeat. It wasn't a polite rap, it was a demand. I looked through the peephole. There they were. My father, his face red and pinched with anger, and my brother, Mark, standing behind him, wearing an X. Pression of smug belligerence. He looked like a man who had brought a sledgehammer to a debate, confident in his ability to smash through any resistance. I took a deep, calming breath and opened the door, but I didn't step back to let them in. I stood firmly in the doorway, blocking their entrance. "Martha," my father barked, skipping any greeting. "We need to talk. Let us in." "We can talk right here," I said, my voice even and calm. This was my territory. I would control the terms of this engagement. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "What did you do to the account? I tried to pay for the reunion cabin, and the card was declined. It was embarrassing." "It wasn't declined because I did something," I replied, looking directly at him. "It was declined because there wasn't enough money in it. Simple as that." Mark pushed past my father, his smirk firmly in place. "Oh, cut the act, Martha. You turned off the money tap because you're having a little temper tantrum. You got your feelings hurt, so now you're going to punish everyone. It's pathetic." This was his strategy: frame my actions as emotional and irrational, while his own were logical and justified. It was a tactic that had worked on my parents for years, but it wouldn't work on me anymore. "This has nothing to do with a temper tantrum, Mark," I said, my gaze shifting to him. "It's about a simple business principle. The family reunion, as you so clearly stated, is for real family. I am not included. Therefore, my financial contributions are also not included. You can't have it both ways." My father stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "What are you talking about? Your contributions? It's our money." And there it was, the core of their delusion, spoken out loud. They genuinely believed the money was theirs. They saw my income as a communal family resource over which they had rights. This was the moment for the first reveal. "No, Dad, it's not," I said, my voice softening slightly, not with weakness, but with the pity one feels for a person about to receive a harsh dose of reality. "Your pensions cover the mortgage and the utilities with just a little left over. Everything else, the car payments, the club membership, the groceries from the specialty store Mom loves, the money you give to Mark, that all comes from me. It's a gift. A gift I have been giving you every month for over 15 years. Richard looked stunned, as if I had just started speaking in a foreign language. He turned to Mark, expecting a rebuttal, a denial. Mark, for his part, tried to lash out. "She's lying. She's trying to control you. Dad, she's always been like this, using her money to make herself feel important. You can't let her get away with it." His words were sharp, but they carried a new, frantic edge. The sledgehammer wasn't working. "Am I lying, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Should I show him the statements? Should I show him the transfers from my personal accounts that just happened to coincide with your last 3 failed startups? You want to talk about family? Real family doesn't treat their sister like an ATM while publicly humiliating her. Mark's face went pale. He had no defense against the facts. His only weapons were bluster and manipulation, and they were useless against a spreadsheet. My father looked back and forth between us, a flicker of doubt finally appearing in his eyes. He had come here expecting me to crumble and apologize. He had expected me to plead for forgiveness. Instead, I had presented him with a version of his life he had never considered, one where he was not a patriarch providing for his family, but a retiree living on the charity of the daughter he had just allowed to be cast aside. The foundation of his world was cracking, and the confrontation had only just begun. Their retreat was not a surrender, it was a tactical withdrawal. They left my doorstep in a cloud of sputtering anger from my father and simmering silence from Mark. I knew the fight was far from over. Mark was a cornered animal, and that made him desperate. His next move, I suspected, would be to try and regain control of the narrative, to paint me as the villain to anyone who would listen. The next few days were a war of information. My mother began calling again, her tone shifting from dismissive to pleading. "Martha, your father is beside himself. He says you've made terrible accusations. Mark is very hurt. You're tearing this family apart." "I'm not the one who publicly uninvited a family member from a reunion," I replied calmly. "I'm just presenting the facts of the situation." "Facts? What about feelings? What about loyalty?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I've been loyal for 25 years, Mom. My loyalty funded your entire lifestyle. When was my loyalty to you all demonstrated at that dinner table?" The question was met with silence. She had no answer. Meanwhile, Mark was trying to rally the troops. I got a call from my aunt, my father's sister, who scolded me for disrespecting my elders and airing the family's dirty laundry. It was clear Mark had fed her a heavily edited version of events, one where I was the unstable, vindictive daughter, and he was the concerned son trying to hold things together. This was the final piece of evidence I needed. They were not just mistaken, they were actively working to rewrite reality to suit their needs. My resolve hardened. They didn't need a partial truth, they needed the entire, unvarnished, documented history of their financial lives. I spent the next evening compiling my case. I took the 12-page spreadsheet and began adding annotations. I attached copies of bank statements with my personal transfers highlighted in yellow. I found old emails where my father had asked me for money to help Mark with a deposit on a new apartment or to cover a bill until his next client paid. I printed every document, creating a thick, undeniable dossier of financial dependency. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about liberation. I was liberating myself from the role of the silent provider, and I was liberating them from the comfortable delusion they had lived in for years. The final straw came a week after the initial confrontation. My father called me, his voice weary and defeated. "Martha, look, let's just put this behind us. Your mother is a wreck. The reunion is off. Just turn the account back on. We can talk about everything later." He was still trying to negotiate from a position of authority he no longer held. He thought the cancellation of the reunion was a major concession. He didn't understand that the reunion was just a symptom. The disease was the deep-rooted disrespect and entitlement. "I'll be happy to talk, Dad," I said, "but not later. We'll talk this Saturday, at your house, and I want everyone there, you, Mom, and Mark." "I don't think Mark wills." "If Mark is not there, then there is nothing to talk about," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument, "and the account remains as it is. Saturday, noon." I hung up before he could object. The stakes were now higher than ever. This would not be a shouting match on my doorstep. It would be a formal presentation, a final audit of our family's emotional and financial bankruptcy. I knew Mark would be there. His ego wouldn't allow him to be absent while I held the stage. He would come armed with his usual arsenal of charm and deflection. But this time, I wasn't coming with just my feelings. I was coming with a briefcase full of facts. The spell of the golden child was about to be broken by the cold, hard reality of the numbers. When I arrived at my parents' house at precisely noon on Saturday, the atmosphere was thick with a tense, funereal silence. The dining room table, the scene of my humiliation just a couple of weeks prior, had been repurposed as the stage for this final showdown. My mother was nervously fiddling with the placemats, my father was staring out the window with his arms crossed, and Mark was leaning back in his chair, affecting an air of bored detachment. Jennifer and their children were conspicuously absent. This was for real family, after all. I didn't sit down immediately. I walked to the head of the table and placed my leather briefcase on its polished surface. I clicked it open with a sharp, definitive sound that made everyone look up. From it, I removed 4 identical folders. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice as steady and professional as if I were leading a corporate board meeting. "I know this has been a difficult couple of weeks, but the conversations we've had so far have been unproductive, based on emotion and misinformation. Today, we're going to base our conversation on facts." I slid a folder across the table to each of them, one for my father, one for my mother, and one for Mark. I kept the last one for myself. Mark scoffed, not even bothering to open his. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Martha, are you serious? You brought homework." "Open it, Mark," I said, my eyes locking onto his. "Page 1. My father, intrigued despite himself, opened his folder. My mother followed suit, her hands trembling slightly. Inside, the first page was a simple, colorful pie chart. "This chart," I explained, "represents the total income deposited into your living expense account over the last 10 years. The small, blue slice, about 30%, represents your combined pensions. The large, green slice, the other 70%, represents direct deposits from my personal salary." I let the silence hang in the air as they processed the visual. My father's face went slack with shock. My mother let out a small, quiet gasp. "Turn to page 2, I continued. "This is an itemized breakdown of all non-essential expenditures over $500 for the same period." I gestured towards Mark. "You'll notice, Mark, that your name appears quite frequently. There's the $10,000 for your We design agency that never launched, the $5,000 for your photography studio equipment, the repeated $2,000 infusions to cover rent. All told, over the past decade, you have personally received over $60,000 of my money, funneled through Mom and Dad." Mark's face for the first time lost its smirk. He looked cornered. "That was a loan. I was going to pay it all back." "There is no loan agreement, Mark," I said coolly. "There is only a pattern of you taking and me providing. Now, please look at the final page." The last page was the summary spreadsheet, showing the grand total of my contributions over the years. The number was well into 6 figures. It was a staggering sum, laid out in the stark, unforgiving black and white of a financial report. My father dropped his head into his hands. I had no idea, Martha. I thought we were doing okay." "You were doing okay because I made sure you were," I said gently, my voice losing its hard edge. "I did it because I love you. I never wanted you to worry. I wanted you to have a comfortable retirement. I didn't want you to have to say no when Mark came asking for help." I turned my full attention to my brother. "But you, Mark, you knew they didn't have that kind of money. You kept coming back to the well, knowing full well who was filling it. You took, and your thanks was to mock me, to exclude me, to tell me I'm not family. The one person who was literally funding your life." Suddenly, my mother spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "He told us not to tell you about the money, Richard." She looked at my father. "Every time he asked, he'd say, 'Don't tell Martha, she wouldn't understand. She's always so tight with her money.' That was it. That was the ultimate betrayal. He hadn't just taken from me, he had actively conspired to hide it, all while painting me as the stingy, unfeeling one." My father looked up, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. He turned his gaze on his son, and for the first time in my life, I saw him look at Mark without a trace of blind adoration. He saw him for what he was. "What have you done?" Richard asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. It wasn't a question of logistics, it was a deep, existential question. What have you done to this family? What have you done to your sister? Mark crumbled. All the bluster, all the charm, all the arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a petulant, frightened man. It wasn't like that. I was going to get it all back. My latest project is about to take off. But no one was listening. The spell was broken. The golden child's pedestal had disintegrated into dust. In the wreckage, there was only the quiet, damning truth of the numbers in the folders on the table. The public humiliation had come full circle, but this time, the target wasn't me. It was the man who had thought he could have it all without ever paying the price. The aftermath of that meeting was not explosive, but transformative. Mark left the house that day without another word, the folder of his financial history left open on the table like an abandoned testament to his deceit. He didn't call. He didn't text. For the first time, he had no charming excuse, no clever deflection. He had been exposed not by accusations, but by his own actions, meticulously recorded. The weeks that followed were quiet and reflective. My parents and I began to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. They came to my apartment, not with demands, but with tearful, heartfelt apologies. My father, a man I had never seen cry, sat on my sofa and apologized for taking me for granted, for being blind to my brother's manipulation, and for laughing at that dinner table. "It was the worst mistake of my life, Martha," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were the only one being a real family member, and we pushed you away." My mother, for her part, apologized for her passivity, for always smoothing things over for Mark, and for failing to stand up for me. We didn't ignore the decades of hurt, but we addressed them with a new honesty that was both painful and healing. I did not immediately turn the money back on. Instead, I helped them create something they'd never had before, a budget. We sat down together with their actual income, their pensions, and worked out what they could truly afford. It was a sobering process for them. The country club membership had to go. The fancy European car was traded in for a sensible sedan. They learned to live within their means. About a month later, I proposed a new arrangement. I told them I was willing to help, but not by giving them a blank check. I set up a trust, managed by a neutral third party from my professional network, that would provide them with a modest, fixed monthly stipend to supplement their pensions for necessities and health care. It was a safety net, not a lifestyle fund. The support was no longer invisible, it was structured, formal, and conditional on mutual respect. They accepted the terms with gratitude. As for Mark, his downfall was swift and decisive. Without the Bank of Martha to fall back on, his freelance career, built on a foundation of exaggerated successes, quickly collapsed. His wife, Jennifer, who had been blissfully unaware of the true source of their income, was furious. The last I heard, Mark had been forced to take a 9-to-5 entry-level marketing job, and they had downsized to a small rental apartment an hour outside the city. He had to learn to be financially responsible for the first time in his 42 years. The family reunion never happened. Our family, as it was, had been built on a fragile and false foundation. Now we were slowly, carefully building a new one. It was smaller, quieter, but infinitely stronger. It was based not on unspoken obligations and entitled assumptions, but on clear boundaries and earned respect. 6 months after that terrible dinner, I was at my parents' house. We were eating pot roast at the dining room table. The mood wasn't loud or boisterous, it was peaceful. We talked about our days, about a book my mother was reading, about a new project I was leading at work. There was an ease between us that I hadn't felt since I was a child. As I drove home that evening, a sense of profound peace washed over me. I had not set out to destroy my family, I had set out to save myself. In doing so, I had forced them all to confront the truth. The vindication wasn't in their punishment, but in our collective healing. I was still the responsible one, the analyst who understood the numbers. But now, they finally saw me not just as a provider, but as a daughter, a sister, and the undeniable head of our newly defined and very real family.